Welkom terug by die groot ontbyt. As deel van Wêreld-natuurbewaringsdag wat môre is, gesels ons vanoggend met Dr. Clarens Martin en ook Nicola Martin oor spesifiek die plantegroei van die Oos-Vrystaat en ook die werk wat Clarens Village Conservancy doen om te help daarmee. Good morning.
Hi.
Good morning.
It's lovely having you on the show this morning.
Yeah.
It's great to have you, Grant. We're so looking for. I read a couple of your info pieces, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about invasive species, especially in high mountainous areas. Tell me your work now. What are you now busy with now?
So I recently moved back to the Free State. I was born here in Clarence and spent my younger years here, but then moved down to the Eastern Cape for 20 years. So I've recently moved back, and I started a new program about 3-4 years ago to try and help manage the invasive plants that are really invading these mountain areas and the grassland areas, as they're really regions that were neglected over the years. We've really focused on the fynbos and our waterways and cactaceae, and our mountains got neglected. So I've moved back here with an ambitious project to try and find some solutions to managing these plants growing up here.
Our mountains are such important water catchment areas. There are so many things about the mountains, like you say, that we've been ignoring in the last period. What are the big issues now in mountainous areas, especially in plant-wise?
Yeah, well, I think they face many of the issues that just about every ecosystem is facing: climate change, habitat change, and for me, invasive alien plants are really the three really big ones. But they're also lacking a bit in supportive legislation protecting our mountain systems. So to do with that, they often also are boundary systems, and so we share boundaries. And when there's boundaries, there's often a conflict of legislation governing and managing those systems. So it really is a melting pot of issues, our mountain systems. But you're absolutely right regarding them being an important water system. I think 50% of the water in South Africa comes from these systems. And so it's madness for us not to be looking to protect them and to reduce invasive species, which consume far more water than the native vegetation within these systems.
Mm-hmm. Grant, what does nature conservation entail?
Wow. I like to think of it a bit from a non-human perspective. I like to think of the poor little organisms out there trying to survive in the modern day. I think as humans, we exist and we find it quite difficult. And they are just like us, and they're finding it incredibly difficult with the climate changing, as I said, as their habitats are getting reduced and changed. So I feel nature conservation is really us trying to just give them an opportunity to exist. And by doing that, we protect them, we protect the biodiversity, and we protect them from going extinct. But in so doing, we also protect ourselves. Our ecosystems are massively important to our functioning. The ecosystem services we derive from natural systems really keep us alive and provide us with a huge amount. And so nature conservation for me is really protecting those ecosystems, the little organisms within those and the rare organisms within those, to benefit them, but also in turn to benefit ourselves.
And Grant, we are all protectors, supposed to be custodians of conservation of nature. Nicola, you are with the Clarens Village Conservancy. You are really making a difference in the area where you are as well. Tell us more about the Clarens Conservancy's work.
So the Clarens Village Conservancy took over the Clarens Nature Reserve in 2004 as the custodians of that reserve. And they've got a few projects on the go where they try and educate people about environmental issues. They try and run a few projects for species control and try and protect the biodiversity of the area. So that Clarence has got this beautiful zone of green where people can experience nature and come and enjoy it.
And Grant, what makes the vegetation and the plant life in the Eastern Free State so special? Is it that much unique from any other biome or any other area?
Very much so, especially the area where we're in here. It's really a boiling pot of different climates coming together. So we get the cold, the wet weather up from the eastern side of the country. We get the drier weather from the central part of the country. But then we're also up in the mountains, as you can see from the images. So that combination of attributes really drives the environment that we got here. And we also have these incredibly harsh winters. We can go down to this winter already -12, last winter -15, 16. So we have harsh winters that really selects out certain species, both our native species and the organisms that can exist in that, but also invasive species. So it's not really suitable for a lot of species, but the species that do get here often have unique characteristics to allow them to survive in this environment.
What are some of those species that can only be found there?
Well, there are many, and they range from birds to animals, and in the plants, most of them are long scientific names that most people wouldn't be able to pick up on. But I'd like to point out that it should be mainly the grassland biome. We have a small shrubby section on the mountain sides, but it's a grassland biome, and the grassland biome is incredibly beautiful and dynamic and diverse. And when I say grassland biome, people think it's grassland, but if you go and sit in those grasslands, the amount of wildflowers that exist in those grasslands are just truly incredible. I'd encourage anyone to come in spring and summer and just sit down in the grassland, in a pristine grassland like the Clarence Conservancy area, and just have a look at the incredible, beautiful little flowers coming up there. It really is a beautiful place.
It is wonderful. It is absolutely wonderful. Nicola, we're going to talk to you later on specifically about what Clarence Conservancy is doing now, raising a bit of funds later with the Titanic. I also want to chat about invasive species, specific species, Grant. But before we get there, we're just going to break for news and we'll be back after that. So ja, net 'n bietjie vir 'n nuusbreek en as ons terug is na die advertensie, dan gesels ons verder. Ons gesels verder met Dr. Grant en Nicola Martin, aangesien dit nou môre Wêreld-natuurbewaringsdag is. En ons gesels spesifiek oor die plantegroei in die Oos-Vrystaat en wat die Clarens Village Conservancy doen om hierdie plantstreek te bewaar. Nicola, I would like to talk about the Clarens Conservancy's part they play in the Titanic. Tell us about the Titanic coming up pretty soon.
Yeah, so the Titanic Challenge is a trail run that we're organizing on the 3rd of September. And this is a fundraising event whereby all the proceeds will go back to the Clarens Village Conservancy. So they're able to use those funds in the various projects that they run throughout the year, as well as support the rangers that basically preserve this area. They work really hard on their hiking trails. And we thought by putting out a trail run, we'd be able to showcase the natural beauty of Clarence and the Eastern Free State area. So we've named the run the Titanic Challenge after the iconic rock that runners will run past and then ascend, which looks exactly like the Titanic ship. And that's taking place on the 3rd of September.
That's a lovely opportunity to get some funds for the Conservancy going. What kind of programs do the Conservancy run throughout the year? What can people look at?
So the way that the Conservancy is structured is that they are a non-for-profit organization. So they rely on the Clarence residents and sales of hiking permits and mountain bike trails and hiking maps. So that's how they make most of their funds. Which is why we're trying to raise some additional capital for the Conservancy. Mm-hmm. But the projects that they're involved with is a lot of school and community engagement in terms of environmental awareness and how we can really work with nature and not against it. They're involved with a lot of alien invasive species control and how to preserve our areas for future generations. So they really try champion nature and how we can live alongside it rather than deplete it.
I would like to know what is the biggest challenges, because Nicola, you mentioned the invasive weed species. So I would like to know, Grant, from you, what would be the biggest challenges with regards to the invasive weed species?
Yeah, the whole area, and that includes then the Clarens Village Conservancy, is effectively under threat by invasive species. And one of the attributes of invasive species is that it spreads rapidly. So in a lot of these areas, no matter how much effort you put into it, they're still winning. So as fast as you're trying to control, usually with mechanical or herbicide applications, they're spreading behind you and coming back behind you. And so the main challenges always are funding, trying to get enough money to put in enough programs to try and control these things, and then consecutive funding. Often we have funding for a short period. We can go in and clear a whole population of invasives, but because of their seed banks and because of their abilities to survive, which makes them invasive, they're often there for a long, long time. Seed banks can last 80 years, 100 years.
Sure.
So it really has to be funding over a really long period. And if you don't have that consistent funding, then you're really never really going to get on top of the program. The second problem for me is they all require a champion. Unless you have, in this case, the Clarens Village Conservancy, which do an incredible job in trying to manage invasives, but unless you have a champion who's really willing to really create a program and invest in a program to try and get on top of an invasive species or group of invasive species, you often don't get the successes you hope for or want to see.
And that's critical. I mean, it's easy for all of us to talk about it, but it's about the action. It's about getting the community engaged and getting people engaged and aware of the issues. What invasive species are we looking at this stage? The big oaks, the guys coming in with a muscle taking over where they shouldn't be. What are we looking at this stage?
Yeah, so specifically in the Eastern Free State, one of the species I've worked a huge amount on is Robinia pseudoacacia, black locust. You'll often notice it also a lot around Johannesburg. It has these huge white pendulous flowers, very pretty, turns yellow in autumn, and at the moment doesn't have any leaves, and so you can clearly see its big thorns. It's an incredibly difficult plant to control. The more you chop it down, you seem to make it angry. So even if you chop it down in herbicide, you just make it angry and it comes back with vigor. And the new ones coming back have bigger thorns and are more dense, making it harder to manage. And so it's really a problematic species. And then different to just about anywhere else on Earth, we seem to have the suite of invasive rose species invading the grassland biome. And if you drive around now, they're very easy to see. They're called fire thorns. And they look like these beautiful red flames sticking up in the veld or growing up the kloofs. And so those are very problematic in the Eastern Free State. And then we share a lot of invasives with the rest of the country, the blue gums, which drink a huge amount of the water, the invasive Australian acacias. Yeah, anywhere you look, you can find invasive species. And within invasion biologists, we all like to argue ours is the worst and the worst, and therefore we deserve the most money to try and manage it. But yeah, there are a lot of problems for us to deal with. But we are also grateful to government. Government has a really good programs in South Africa trying to manage these invasive species, and they support research into the various groups of invasive species. And so at least we aren't just leaving them be, and we are trying, and our government is trying, and conservancies are trying, and I believe we can make a difference by trying to eradicate a lot of these big invasives.
It's great to hear that there is a glimmer of hope. Thank you very much, Grant and Nicola, for chatting to us this morning. And almal 3 September, die Titanic Trail Run. Kry 'n kaartjie, skryf in as jy hou van hardloop. Gemaak het raai, daar's mos nou nie 'n mooier plek om te hardloop in die lente as spesifiek nou daar rondom Clarence nie. En dis ook vir 'n baie goeie doel vir die Clarens Village Conservancy. Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us this morning.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Pierre.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thanks
Jennifer.
so much.